Hello, how are you? Thanks for choosing this video. There's lots more to come on the channel, so please stick around. Hello and welcome. This is Cloud State of Play, the July 2024 episode. My name is Richard Simon. I am Cloud Therapist. Well, ladies and gentlemen, he is back. The unparalleled Paul Bevan is back, Research Director for Infrastructure at Bloor Research, and probably quite a few other things as well, which we won't mention because this is a, well, it's on YouTube. So not sure whether it's actually by popular demand that he's back, but maybe it's because nobody else puts up with my mad rants and so on better than Paul does. So let's say hello to Paul. Paul, hello and welcome back.
Thank you, Richard. Good to be back. I've missed you. It's yeah.
Oh. I'm gushing.
I've missed the jousting and the odd jibes here and there, and yeah, absolutely. So it's good. It's good to be back.
Fantastic. So you're raring to go with another 3 topics.
Oh, absolutely.
Fabulous. Okay, you've come back at the right time as well. So because this is our 2nd anniversary, would you believe, for Cloud State of Play. I can't believe we've been going. No, you're shaking your head. I would shake my head as well if I wasn't talking at the same time. So, yeah, exactly. Okay, yeah. So yeah, so our 2nd anniversary. Lost my track there for a minute. Yeah, yeah. And anyway, so we've 2nd anniversary. Really great to achieve that again. And again, we have a great lineup of 3 topics for you. But before we do that, because this is 2nd anniversary episode, we thought we'll kind of do a little review as we did, I think, around the first time, the first year. So again, can't believe that it's it's been kind of 2 years, but I've kind of always really appreciated all your input, Paul. So it's always been fantastic. So it's really nice to be able to do a little bit of a review. But before we do the anniversary review, let's reveal our 3 topics for this month. So the first topic is the Labour government impact on the tech sector. So in the UK, a new government has come in recently at the general election. That's the Labour government. So we're going to be looking at what impact they will have on the tech sector, and probably impact being the operative word there. The future, the second one is, the second topic is the future of open source software. This is, I think, going to be quite an interesting one. Paul and I have actually picked up on this a number of times in the past from previous episodes. But now we kind of want to, we've kind of seen the impact of the announcements and changes to licenses and things like that recently. I've covered that as well in a previous Class State of Play episode, actually quite recently. But now we kind of want to project into the future and see what's going to happen there. And then the third topic is data and the cloud. So Paul wanted to ask is it a marriage made in heaven or hell? So those are the 3 topics. I think it's going to be really interesting to go through those. But Paul, let's first do a review. How, if you can recall, just a quick question for you, how do you think the last sort of 12 months or episodes have been for Class State of Play?
I think that they've been entertaining. I think that's
that's a good word.
Certainly from my perspective, and it's forced me to think more deeply about some of the topics we've researched. Open source software, for example, was something that really, from my point of view, it existed, but I hadn't really got underneath the covers of it, and so that's been an interesting journey. I think the whole move towards public cloud and this whole argument about repatriation, which I know exercises you, is one that probably we had a lot to talk about probably in the first year and at the start of this 2nd year. But my perspective is that over the course of the year, that's become a much more nuanced discussion at best, and a non-discussion, at the ultimate. So I think that's been an interesting journey. around the sort of repatriation issue, but also the prevalence of cloud. I mean, you and I offline were talking, and I was saying, cloud is now IT, and IT is the cloud. It's almost as if, why are we doing a cloud state of play? Because cloud is, and that's where I think we got to over the course of the last year. This sort of growing realization that it was the way in which we use IT.
Yeah, and just that's an interesting point. So just pick up on that. And this is not something that we discussed or rehearsed or anything. But is it because now we've kind of got a new toy to play with, i.e. AI or artificial intelligence, that kind of cloud has become establishment?
To an extent, yes. I mean, AI has become the new shiny toy that everybody play with. But I think, even before that was happening, this sort of inexorable move of cloud becoming the main way in which we develop.
Mature? Would you say mature? Mature enough?
It's not mature enough. I'm sure in future ones we'll get into some of the challenges that the way in which cloud is developed presents challenges going forward. Challenges of complexity, scale, speed, all those sort of issues. So I don't necessarily think cloud has matured. I used to talk about things being angry teenagers. It's sort of moved beyond angry teenager phase into, really know it all, sort of, late 20s and early 30s, when you think, oh my goodness me, it hasn't yet got grumpy stage like me that says, when you get to my age, you get grumpy, and I haven't got that sort of maturity around. But generally, I think the AI thing has sort of deflected.
I
think I was joking when I said, cloud is IT and IT is cloud. It's such a meme now that it's almost not worth having the discussion anymore. I've given up. I've been doing my commute bit, trying to hold back the tide of this is not proper cloud. And I've given up that, just accept that's what people call it.
No, I agree. I think we can still continue to push back on certain things, and I do agree with you, I think, on those things. But I guess maybe other things have kind of superseded it, and I think we've joked a few times about the cloud becoming the new mainframe, so and things like that. So that's been, I think, interesting. But let me pick up on a few of the topics, because I kind of did a compilation. So we talked about unsupported open source being perilous back in the June 2023 episode. I'll try and include all these links, by the way, but there's a playlist, guys, as well. So anybody watching or listening to this episode, there's actually a playlist as well on the channel, so do check that out. All the Cloud State of Play episodes are on there if you kind of wanted to binge watch that. We talked about hardware and storage vendors on the ropes in the same episode, which was, I think, quite funny. And we did hit on, I can't believe this, we actually hit on, is OpenStack dead in the same episode? So June 23 was a fantastic episode. Some really controversial topics, something that we managed to pick up on. Sometimes things just converge, right? I mean, we have some really cool topics, and you and I think, bounce on those and say, yeah, let's do that one. As well. The one, again, another one that I was really proud of was that we did some really good stuff on was the British Airways IT systems blunders. That was in the July 2023 episode. And then more recently was the Post Office and Fujitsu scandal as well, the UK Post Office and Fujitsu scandal. That was in the February 24 episode.
Actually, on, doesn't it?
I actually released that as an unfiltered episode. So if you guys just want to check that out, there's an unfiltered episode on the channel just on that, and actually that picked up quite a lot of views, which was good. So I really wanted to highlight that episode. So I was quite, I wouldn't say proud, but really happy that that we looked at that. I think we've also looked at things like cloud lock-in. So we were concerned about that back in July last year. Data sovereignty back in August. The last change in Red Hat's open source strategy, I'm sure not the last, but the last one, or the previous one, we picked up on that in August. We talked about the love-in between Oracle and Microsoft, or AKA Oracle throwing in the towel and putting all its stuff over the fence in Microsoft Azure. That was in the September episode. What was your thoughts on that one, Paul?
Oh, I suppose not surprised. I was sort of speechless at the time. I still think I am.
Speechless still are, yeah. It sounds like it.
You sort of see the sense, but it's almost, it's like catching a tiger by the tail.
Yeah.
It's an exciting ride, and you seem to be going very fast in one direction. But the minute the tiger turns around and bites you, then you're in trouble. And that's really where I think Oracle is, that one. Yeah. I mean, I had quite a lot of time for the guys who were doing the Oracle Cloud. I thought they had a really good understanding of what they needed to do, but this sort of constant drive for revenues and new areas to conquer, as it were, meant that they sort of felt they couldn't keep up.
Yeah.
Had to throw it over the fence. I think that's potentially very dangerous thing for them to have done.
Yeah, but I mean, I think we reflected at the time that it was part of a growing trend. Like VMware, striking their deals many years ago with all the big three cloud providers. NetApp throwing storage over the fence as well, and numerous other vendors as well. So, but yeah, it was interesting. Okay, so what else did we have? I really like this one from September 23. Could AI break the cloud? And you were right. It has broken the cloud. I mean, it's not like, literally the internet went down all over the world and everybody panicked. But the point of, AI is going to need a lot more power, a lot more resources. And hey, guess what? We don't have enough of any of those right now. Yeah. So that is essentially what, I think that's answered that. I think that's essentially what we were looking at. And I think you were right to ask that question.
Okay. Nice to be right every now and again.
Every now and then. Yeah. Not always right, but you were right on that one. Okay. And then we took a swipe at whether SaaS is really cloud. And that was in the October episode. That was quite cool. I looked at the end of the Intel and AMD duopoly in the September episode, I believe, for that one. Oh, no, sorry, that was the October episode as well. Will developers accept platform engineering? That was all in the October one. That's another controversial episode, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
I can't believe that we picked up some really cool topics, I think, again, on that one. Like I said, sometimes it converges, right? That's the whole, that's how it works out.
Again, because have they accepted platform engineering?
Well, yeah, people seem to think they have, but I'm not quite sure.
My doubts, I think.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure either. There's a lot of kind of, just what's the word? Just covering over that and kind of, oh yeah, I'm sure they'll be fine.
Yeah.
Okay, and then we looked at in the November episode, we looked at sustainability in the cloud, which I thought was, I think, quite appropriate around the time when we were saying, AI is going to destroy all the sustainability targets, which it has essentially, and it will continue to, I think, to do so, probably for the next 5 to 10 years. Who knows? Until things, get back into the sort of normal numbers again. And I think we also joked about if you use AI to kind of come up with an idea or come up with a solution for sustainability, by the time you've reached it, you've destroyed the planet anyway, or something. I think was the joke that we had. You had a thing for data streaming, analytics, and data pipelines back in November last year. I don't know why that just kind of, you seem to hit on that and said, I want to talk about that. I was like, okay, we'll talk about that, Paul.
It was just down to the fact that when you look at, I'm said to you again offline that I'm getting quite interested in a number of vertical lines of business. In financial services trading,
right,
in supply chain, things that we rely on day in, day out that require vast amounts of data and all those, but things delivered in real time.
Right. Right.
It just seemed to be that it was all driving to a certain point, and I think we might even come back to a little bit of that later in our data in the cloud piece. But
Okay.
that's really
Yeah.
what was driving it. It was I was looking at some particular lines of business where some of the preconceptions I had about where and how you use technology to support, the use of data and the need for speed changed my preconceptions somewhat.
Right. Okay. And then more recently, we picked up on the whole Broadcom and VMware acquisition. I think we actually covered this as far back as late 2022. I think when the first announcement was made, then we tracked it last year. And then more recently, earlier this year, in the Feb episode, we looked at VMware being dead, but we basically declared that arbitrarily and unilaterally agreed on that. And the March episode, we looked at the end of virtualization, basically containerization and sort of orchestration being the new players on the block. And then we had another go, or I had another go at the server vendors and the AI dichotomy. I just said they haven't got a clue. They're trying to remain relevant again. So that was in the March episode of this year. And then more recently, when you were on your secondment or whatever it was, your sabbatical secondment, whatever you were doing out there somewhere, your extended holiday, I covered the growing trend of open source vendors changing their licenses. That's actually something that I'm going to probably pick up on as a panel discussion in the near future. So I'm just trying to put that together. So keep a lookout for that, dear viewers. And then the last one was a little bit more interesting around different architecture design styles as well. So yeah, it's been, I think, a number of, I wish I could release most of these as separate episodes in the unfiltered segment, which is why I really sort of created the unfiltered segment, because a lot of these kind of sometimes maybe get buried in an hours-long discussion or something. So kind of highlighting them separately is cool. I just don't have the time to sit down and get that done. But I do reach that, and sort of the lovely audience I have. I try and do that when I can. But yeah, it's been an interesting year, and really, like I said, some really good episodes and some fantastic topics I think that we picked up on. And again, I'm grateful for your input, Paul, over the last 12 months, and your insights as always. Okay, so let's move on to the first of our topics for this month, which is the Labour government's impact on the tech sector in the UK. So I'll let you start off, Paul. I've done kind of some research on this myself, looked at things like manifestos and so on. Yes, actually, I have done some investigative journalism for once, not just pure guesses. Which I'm also quite good at, I think. But I've actually done some proper research this time. So off you go. What's your take on it?
Okay, well, why did I choose this and start? Partly, I think, because I think there's a lot more hope around what's happening with Labour generally now than perhaps we've had in the last 10 years or so. And therefore, was that likely to wash into the tech sector? And so a bit like you, I've done some sort of research into what's been said. Had a look. Peter Kyle, who's the Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology in the new government, has been sort of quite vocal about what they want to do. And I think if you tie together what he says, along with particularly Rachel Reeves, who's the Chancellor, this idea that they need to use technology to drive us forward as a country, I think is a sort of underpinning. But clearly there's another side too, which is this whole sort of regulation and control. One of the things that you tend to get with a Labour government rather than a Conservative government is more focus on regulation. and control and central control. On this occasion, it might work to advantage. I mean, there's the whole issue of AI regulation. I think that's going to have quite an impact. There's been a lot of talk about how difficult it could become if the EU gets too sort of restrictive in terms of AI regulation. And yet we see a Labour government that is probably going to build closer and closer ties with the EU to sort of almost harmonise things more with the EU. So it may well be that there'll be some battles to be fought, certainly with the big tech companies around AI regulation. But I think there's certainly a good focus on it. But from my perspective, I think they've said all the right words in terms of improving the economy, reducing red tape for small and medium-sized enterprises trying to deal with government IT contracts. I think this idea of a national data library in the public sector, is an interesting one to pull things together. Will it work? The government's not got all governments have got a poor record of having these sort of big sort of ideas and getting them to work from a technology viewpoint. It's interesting as well. I think if you look at what they're talking about, that they may well decide to keep some Tory era approaches. I was going to say regulation, but certainly around funding and sort of innovation and funding. The Tories were starting to put stuff in place, albeit rather slowly, that was going to help in terms of driving sort of tech investment forward. I get the idea that Labour's quite a pragmatic government, not an ideological government, and it will take a number of pragmatic approaches to that. So they will try and make it easier to get funding, I think, in terms of that. But getting rid of red tape, I think, will be a huge help. And one area that interests me, because it's sort of popped up recently again as part of this, is this whole issue of we talked about how we need more data centers because of AI and all those sort of things. It is making it easier, and they've specifically talked about data centers getting approval for data center building. Microsoft want to invest more data centers in the UK, but clearly the issue has been planning. And I mean, Labour's talked about improving planning regulations right across the piece, but they've specifically stated that they want to make it easier for data center providers to get planning permission for new data centers, probably away from the main areas like the Docklands and Slough and places like that, where they've become oversubscribed, if you like, with that. But going into
data center hubs,
but actually, I think issues of latency are not quite such big issues as they were, certainly because a lot of the real latency critical infrastructure has already been put in place for the banks and places like that. So they can go slightly outside the sort of main hubs to where there is power. I mean, that's the other one. If you think about some of the old industrial areas that have massive power capability. I mean, blast furnaces take huge amounts of power. If they're closing those down, the grid there is ready for them. So I think there's areas. How do you move that along at pace? And I think the government's very focused on trying to do that for various reasons that are both sort of political as well as economic. But I think just in summary, if you sort of weigh it up. They want to make it easier to do business, but at the same time, and this is going to be the conundrum, they want to make sure that things like AI are regulated properly. So it's getting that balance right. We shall see. I mean, the King's speech is on Wednesday. They'll have to lay out their short-term plans for the next Parliament, and it'll be interesting to see what, if anything, comes out of that. But I do see somewhere that says, an organization, a government that's going and saying, I understand that technology is now critical to the way in which we grow our economy. And if Rachel Reeves is saying that, we have to grow our way out of this problem we're in, the only way technology is going to be a lot of how that plays out. So I think anything that they do, they've got to address issues like, visas for people with the right qualifications. There's a shortage of the right level of people, and so they've got to get over some of the issues that are going to appear around how do I bring people in the short term who've got the technology skills we need without driving us into a different debate around immigration.
Yeah, I think that's good. Yeah, I agree. I think that's going to be tricky. So just a couple of clarifications for the audience. So Paul mentioned Tory, which is essentially the Conservative party, is another political party in the UK. He mentioned a couple of locations, Slough and Docklands. Again, these are just locations around the London area for the international.
I mean, it's interesting.
Audience.
Yeah, the reason why they're there. I mean, if you're in America, then the whole sort of Ashburn, Virginia. It's that sort of thing. The interconnections are all there. The pop-up of the Atlantic pipeline comes up in Slough. The European Internet Exchange pops up in Docklands. That's where all the interconnects are. That's why it went there. That's where the market's moving away from, or not moving away. It's fairly well sorted for interconnect. But actually, AI and others require huge amounts of power, and that's where it's going to drive new investment. But yeah, you're right. That's why Slough, and that's why Docklands.
So I think I picked up on similar things. I looked at the Labour manifesto, which was published on the 13th of June of this year. So they set out the first 6 steps for change, but there wasn't anything IT specifically or technology specifically in those, although somebody said, well, it's probably across all 6 of those, if you really think about it. And I think all the announcements that were made recently were made by Rishi Sunak. I did actually post on this recently. Rishi Sunak is the previous Conservative Prime Minister. And he made an announcement, which I actually had I did a short episode on it with Amanda Brock from Open UK, and we discussed actually all the announcements. It seemed to be like that announcement seemed to be like a copy and paste of all the recent stuff that somebody had, a junior clerk or somebody had in the at number 10 of all the AI investments and things like that. So there was a ton of those from everybody from OpenAI to Anthropic to Google. Some AI startups were all promising to kind of have their HQ and invest in the UK in that. So I think kind of Labour was a little bit short on kind of doing those. The report I picked up on, well, there was a number of those, but there was one from the Centre for European Policy Analysis, the CEPA, back from the 12th of this month, actually, from July. And that one said, so it had first of all had a picture of the new Prime Minister, the Labour Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, and the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. I think it was at the MTC, the Manufacturing Technology Centre, and they were amusingly looking at, or bewilderingly looking at, a Boston Dynamics dog, those robot dogs that run around, which I thought was quite interesting. So, so that was interesting. And the report itself said that apart from the political swipe, as that which said Labour, and I quote, Labour ran a campaign that was a referendum on Tory rule. So that was the quote from that particular report, and it said it was what else to say? Yeah, and Labour has been seen or has been really tight-lipped on kind of technology policy, but that's not surprising. I think there was a lot of kind of tight-lipped stuff in the run-up to the election, and then go on. Sorry,
it's always difficult, reading manifestos and listening to what goes on during an election process. needs to be taken with a huge pinch of salt. Because the realities of what they find when they get through the door, no money left, thank you very much, all those sort of issues mean that they've got some very different issues. But I think there's an intent there from Labour to really try to grow some of the new tech sectors. Rachel Reeves, who the Chancellor of the Exchequer, when she was in, as shadow Chancellor, i.e. in opposition, was spending the last few months heavily going around, technical sectors, financial sectors, meeting with people. Because I think the big thing that comes out of everything I've heard from sort of commentators and people in industry is that they need a period of predictability and certainty about what's going to happen. And therefore, it's important in the first 6 months that they do some of the they seem to be doing to start some of the things they want to get going. Most of them will take years to come to fruition, but I think that's the intent I get, that a government that's prepared to step on some toes in things like planning for data centers, but also to try and get things moving as quickly as possible with a realistic approach, about what's going to happen in the future. So I think, I always take manifestos with a large dose of salt.
Yeah. Well, I'm just glad that the farm near our house is not big enough for a data center. So I think my area is quite safe. So not taking anything greatly seriously, or as you said, this CEPA report with a massive pinch of salt, considering it's European policy. So they do report on things like the digitization of government. So Labour wants to encourage the deployment of cutting-edge technology to improve efficiency, blah, blah, blah. Supporting AI industry and data centers, as you said. So Labour manifesto aims to, quote unquote, ensure our industrial strategy supports the development of the AI sector, and removes planning barriers to new data centers, as you said. But also at the same time, it's imposing or will impose strict AI regulation. So again, doing that as part of the sort of the process. Binding regulation, quotes again, binding regulation on the handful of companies developing the most powerful AI models. That's what the report says. So this is
firing across shot across the bows for Microsoft and Google in particular, I think, by the sound.
Yes. And there has been some recent developments, but we'll leave that aside for now. But yeah, and then it says, unlike the light touch approach of the previous Conservative government, Labour could stifle the transformative technologies rollout. That's their conclusion. But again, I don't really put a lot of faith in the CEPA and what they say. Their language is extremely hostile in that report to the UK in general. What a surprise. I mean, I think the only factual things is the digitization of the government, the planning permission for data centers, as you said, and the AI regulation. That's probably all I can get from that. I do have some other reports. So there was one from the something called the EM360, Enterprise Management 360, that was published on the 8th of July. And the title is How a Labour Government Will Change UK Tech. Again, quite similar in terms of shaking up the business community with policies promising increased investment and economic stability, managing and regulating development of AI. They actually seem to mention a lot of what Rishi Sunak had done last year, which was the AI Safety Summit back in October last year. Again, mentioned, actually they quoted the Labour manifesto, set out binding regulation for major AI firms to improve AI safety. So that's actually in the manifesto, apparently. And then they got some quotes from the industry. So the EMEA VP for PagerDuty. Yeah. What else was here? Let me just read the country manager for Snowflake as well. And yeah, I think they sort of have some concerns about sort of ripple effects being created, and then binding regulation for AI safety being introduced. Those are the main points that those two mentioned. Public sector expected to hire chief AI officers, or KOs. I don't know how you'd pronounce the acronym for that. So chief AI officers in the public sector. Support appropriate application of digital technology and provide environment for innovation to thrive. Sounds a little bit nebulous and academic, but there you go. That was part of that report as well. They mentioned the National Data Library to help data-driven public services. Now, I think, to me, that's a juicy target for hackers to have a go at, especially those in certain dodgy parts of the world. But we'll see how that happens, and whether it's going to be delivered on time, which never happens in IT projects by the government, regardless of what the government is. Remove barriers for building data centers, again, quite similar. So Paul, expect a modular reactor data center being built around your house at some point. I think that would be quite cool.
I think what's driving most people to distraction is the number of new pylons that are going to be
yes,
across the
and those two, yes,
the offshore power grids, into the national grid. So
yes, expect a couple of data centers driven by SMRs in your area anytime soon. Okay, and then investment in digital technology for healthcare. So yeah, that's interesting. A quote from Amanda Brock from the Open UK was in that report. So she's saying, update the outdated tech and public sector and fix our broken NHS. I agree with that. Labour must first look to the country's digital infrastructure. It is not too late for the UK to break free from the shackles of vendor lock-in, which has been allowed to infantilize our public sector. So this is that kind of whole, going back to that sort of Fujitsu and some of all these other players that have been, hanging around the public sector for decades and just sucking it dry with all these, delayed and non-working IT projects that they, kind of start and never really finish properly. Yeah. And then the final piece on that is securing the public sector against cybersecurity.
Yeah, I mean, you can't argue with a lot of the sort of sentiment. I mean, I have a level of sympathy for any tech vendor trying to deal with government procurement, public sector procurement at the moment, and the way in which they develop projects. So good luck to Labour trying to simplify that and make it easier. I think that is going to be a big challenge.
Yeah. Okay, and another report I had was Tech UK. That was back on the 17th of June. So that was titled Party Manifestos. They basically looked at all the parties' manifestos. What do they mean for the tech sector? Tech UK is quite a positive voice, I think, for tech in the UK. Yeah, I think they mentioned, they were the ones who mentioned, yeah, the tech sector's running through all 6 pledges of the Labour manifesto. More data centers, as you said, regulating AI and things like that. They were talking about the creation of a regulatory innovation office, or RIO for short.
I saw that. It wasn't one I thought, I wasn't sure quite what that was going to do and how that was going to. This is a way of saying, how do we cut the red tape? Probably. It sounds like, but it gives it a lovely term: regulatory innovation.
Regulatory innovation office. Yeah. So I think, isn't that a contradiction in terms? Regulatory innovation.
I think so. I think it's a classic, and for those of us who of our generation, Minister and Yes Prime Minister was a wonderful satirical comedy BBC program that ran for many years that most people in government used to duck because they knew how accurate they were.
It was,
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's a classic one of saying, right, we just need another body now to deflect and
Yes.
deflect what's really going on.
Yeah. So yeah. So again, in the manifesto, the Labour manifesto says more data centers. So I guess the guys in the data center hall at Cloud Expo Europe will be very happy with that. So they can carry on for a few more years selling their stuff. Something called DSIT, Digital Center for Government. I don't know what DSIT stands for. DSIT. I don't know what it stands for. I think the report actually didn't say what it stood for. Maybe they didn't understand it either. Again, binding regulation on AI, so that's a repeat of what we heard before. Use of AI in the NHS, yeah, to speed up diagnostic services, but how long is that going to take to implement, and what kind of sovereignty can you guarantee around that, and data privacy and so on?
I think one of the things, again, it's a big interest area of mine for various reasons. But a lot of, I think, the AI focus will be on how to improve process. Right? Yes, you'll see some of these others, but there's such a lot of oversight and sort of regulation to get through in terms of new diagnostic procedures, new technologies, etc. I think the first area that you might see some real progress in AI is on improving the productivity within the NHS in non-medical areas.
Yeah, so more the administrative side, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, there's some simple things maybe we'll come back to. But if you've ever followed a guy called Rory Cellan-Jones or Cellan-Jones, who was a BBC technology reporter for many years, the guy has actually been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and he's really does a wonderful set of blogs every week and a wonderful website that we ought to sort of focus on, where he really does do quite a lot around how is IT, how is technology starting to improve the patient experience.
Right.
Very good. And a lot of it relates to the fact that it's not joined up, and you have to keep, all those sort of issues that we know about, and
Yeah.
other people in other geographies maybe saying, what the hell's going on? Well, they think the NHS is one organization. It's not. It's about 250 different organizations, and they don't talk to each other, all those sort of things. And so he's been really interesting to read into, because he has to interface to the NHS as a patient on a regular basis.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And therefore his knowledge of technology, as well as his situation he's in, makes for fascinating reading and some hope for the future. Interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so I have another one which is called UKTN or UK Tech News, but I won't go into that. I'll just include the links to the descriptions, kind of more or less that's the same thing. Okay, yeah, so interesting topic. I think we've kind of picked on the main things there for that one. So we'll, I think, wait and see how things develop in the future for this one. Okay, so let's move on to our second topic, which was that was the first topic we've been talking for a long time. Second topic: the future of open source software. What was your idea around that, Paul?
Well, I think as you highlighted in the review, we've talked about open source a number of times. And with all the changes that have happened at places like Red Hat and others, what is the future for it? Is it a sustainable model? And therefore, I suppose I come at it from the point of view that says most enterprises that you talk to, love the idea of open source from a development point of view, from a speed point of view, from a sort of new ideas, and from the way it could deliver some real advantages for them, both financial, but also in terms of business positioning. But I've always been concerned about the support issues. And so I sort of dug a little deeper into where they thought that was going. And the one that really struck me, was various discussions going on around, the maintenance of existing code base. Interestingly, just as an aside on that, I'm reading a MIT Technology Review, Massachusetts Institute of Technology Technology Review paper that said, amazingly, 96% of all code bases incorporate open source software. Now, that might be very small bits of open source software in a wider base, so it's not necessarily 96% of all systems out there are open source based. But clearly, from the perspective of development of software, open source has been a boon to business and industry in general, and has got a future. But the real concern comes with the maintenance of those code bases, that are the open source code bases, and they're relying very heavily on volunteers, if you like, to actually keep these code bases running. And that's where I see a real risk in the future, is that, as these people, who are trying to maintain these code bases, get tired or disillusioned or just need money somehow, there's a threat to the independence of those code bases, I think. And that would be a concern of mine. It'd be interesting to get your take on that. And because I think, for all the sort of ideas of Richard Stallman when he set up, the open, what was it called, the Free Software Foundation back in 1983. That sort of wonderful sort of utopian view of being able to develop and share everything freely, hasn't really materialized quite the way he might have thought. I mean, it's still there, and he's still heavily involved with the Free Software Foundation. But the reality is, if you look at the Red Hats of this world and and everybody else, is that it's gone down a slightly different route that has had to pay some doff its cap, if you like, to the needs of the enterprise that's out there, but has also become caught up in major vendor politics, and I think that's always going to be an issue. Always going to be an issue.
Yeah, I would love to find out whether the recent changes, the recent issues and concerns that we've had, and as you said, we have covered this a number of times, and we'll continue to cover it on the channel. Like I said, we're into some panels and things like that in the future as well. I'm wondering whether that's because of not the status quo that we had before. So you had like an open source version of something, and you had an enterprise version of something. If you didn't want to pay for the enterprise, or none of the features of the enterprise were useful to you, just use the open source version, and then it was up to you how to get support and support it yourself, maintain and whatever. But if you wanted, as you said, the support and the kind of have that sort of sustainability model, then you'd go, and as well as the features, the extra features, then you'd go for an enterprise version. You get your subscription for that, and you'd be able to do that. But I'm wondering whether the recent changes are a lot more around this perpetual, we must make more money, we must report better results quarter by quarter. So how can we squeeze the business, the sector, the customers, that we have in order to be able to do that? Oh, I tell you what, I got a great idea. Let's change our license, right? And forget everybody else. Let's forget that this is supposed to be a participation, a community, people who are enthusiastic, as you said, about, maintaining code and volunteering their time and so on. Let's just turn it into a pure greed thing where we have to hit our targets and report every quarter because we have a number of investors who, and Wall Street and, and whoever is actually expecting us to, to achieve those targets, targets quarter by quarter. So I'd love to know if there is a correlation there to what I'm kind of thinking in these more recent, decisions that have been made by the likes of, Red Hat and HashiCorp and, and so on. There's a number of those, not just picking on those names. We did, like I said, I think I covered this a while back, and we mentioned a lot more names than that.
Yeah, I did. Yes is the answer, and very short.
Very simple. Yes, Richard.
you know, whether you want to use the term greed or but there was one word you used in there which I thought was sort of quite interesting. Is, you know, we've got to meet the requirements of our investors.
Yeah.
But when you look at, particularly from a startup perspective, you know, this, how on earth, you know, they have to sort of portray how they're going to get a return for the people who are investing in them. And I think it's, you know, there are so many different things coming along for people to put their money into that they're having to take, you know, so startups different from a you know, the existing Red Hat, HashiCorp and all those, because I think that's a slightly different thing. But you know, from a startup perspective, there's the challenge of getting the money in the first place. I think from an enterprise perspective, you know, in terms of, you know, Red Hat, HashiCorp, and others becoming enterprises themselves, enterprise vendors and vendors, you know, large companies in their own right. Yes, they do have a whole series of people they have to pander to, is the only way you could describe it. And there is very little long-term thinking within Wall Street financial services environment, you know, and let's face it, that is the predominant financial environment that all these companies have to live in. It's a very quarter by quarter focused, and so they have to find different ways of keeping their stock price up, their revenues up, all the things, and they will do virtually anything to make that happen in the short term, you know. And so I so yes, you can call that greed, you can call it, but call it is the natural scheme of things at the moment, is that it's really difficult to fight that.
Yeah, it's capitalism, basically.
And you know, capitalism works for the most part.
Yes.
It's that when I heard my sort of, for the most part, it's how you deal with that bit that is, you know, where you actually need to bring it to heal a little bit without, in fact, stopping the development of new ideas.
Yeah, and I think there are other factors as well, like acquisitions, for example. It's a large company acquiring a smaller company, but it's not going to acquire it until the smaller company makes a few changes here and there to its policy and its strategy and its licensing schemes and so on, in order to make it, shall we say, more attractive, you know, to the acquirer. Right? Yeah. And then once that's done, or that's part of the agreement, then the license changes, and you go from a XYZ license to a subscription license, as Broadcom has done to VMware, or Red Hat has stopped, making its source code available and only upstream to one project, and basically screwed everybody else, you know, in that space who was using it. And then you have projects forking and various other different distributions appearing on the market. HashiCorp again's not done itself any favors recently. With the Terraform license as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. Again, you bring up the term, it forks, and it does regularly, because obviously the groups of people who are trying to maintain what they see as the integrity of the original open source idea, want to go off their own route. But the reality is, of course, it then fragments and fractures, you know, into bits as well. So it's a real challenge. I mean, I'd love to think that we could all, you know, in a utopian world, do stuff for nothing and sort of share everything in this sort of wonderful utopian way. It doesn't work like that, you know, and it's so I suppose as a getting older and more cynical, you sort of say, well, that is the nature of things, and it's how you sort of navigate your way through that. And how many, you know, if you just look at the way in which a few individuals have taken over the IT world, most people don't have the long-term focus or ability to keep it going. At some time, when enough money is waved in front of their face, they'll do all sorts of things that we don't necessarily like, because they go, well, I've worked all my life, haven't I? I mean, the Linus Torvalds of this world are few and far between.
Yes.
Most people will say, I'll take the gold now, please. You know.
Yeah, and most of them are actually driving their startup for that to happen. They're kind of ripening, themselves for.
There are a lot that do that. I mean, but there are a lot that have got an idea. They want to change the world. They want to change the way things happen. But then, the reality of, Maslow's hierarchy of needs comes to play, and you have to feed the family.
Yeah, yeah, have to put food on the table. Indeed. Okay. And the other aspect of it, I think that I slightly wanted to very briefly wanted to touch on was the relevance of open source in the AI world. So apart from the code gen kind of the aspect of it, which we won't probably go into today, just, I think AI for me just doesn't really need open source. I'm just seeing a lot of pure sheer desperation from the open source community trying to remain relevant in that AI space. I think I've said to you before offline on a number of conversations that AI is really an HPC, so high performance computing workload, and HPC, as we all know, is best run when it's as close to the bare metal as possible. But when you start introducing hypervisors and VMs or full fat operating systems or orchestrators and containers, you're adding to those stack unnecessary layers to that software stack. And that can only introduce latency and, more maintenance and blah, blah, blah. So I'm seeing a lot of kind of the open source community trying to, extend its arms and embrace or grab AI and saying, oh, look, we can run this model now. I've put it in Kubernetes, or, I've put everything in a Docker containers, or I'm using XYZ database with it. And it's like, yeah, that's all great, but does it really need that? Do we really need that?
But again, you're coming back to, what's the underlying code? The underlying code quite often are algorithms, certainly currently. I mean, when we get more deeply into neural networks and inference systems, then, I'll stop talking because I don't really understand what's going on there. But a lot of the early AI, machine learning early AI is based on algorithms.
Yeah.
Are freely available. The algorithms are not, no longer sort of proprietary information. So you could argue that sense, and that therefore you can develop code around that to see how those algorithms work. I agree with you that the actual workload is such an HPC environment that you don't want to create too much of a stack in between the hard, the actual bare metal and the application. But the application could be open source. But we've had different discussions around, actually, there's such a commercial advantage that people are going to, it's like, in a big exam where you also make sure nobody's looking over your shoulder to copy your answers. It's that sort of world at the moment. So I think, yes, there's a challenge. Like anything else, and this is, purists won't like this. We live in a hybrid world. We really do live in a world where there's lots of old stuff, lots of new stuff, and having to make everything work together means, pragmatically, you end up with a hybrid type environment. And I think this is no different. I think, the idea of open source software development won't go away, and I think that's secure. How it's maintained and how it's licensed ultimately to make money, and how you then bring in, or maintain a sort of, a community-like environment is community-like structure is the difficult one. But if 96% of all code bases, incorporate open source software, as MIT are suggesting, it ain't going away anytime soon.
Yeah, but there's also a difference, I think. There needs to be a distinction between whether open source software is relevant to AI from whether AI should be open sourced. So AI running does not need open source in order to run. Like I said earlier, it's an HPC workload. It needs to sit as close to the hardware as possible. And if that's a proprietary application like OpenAI's models, so be it. OpenAI doesn't care about open sourcing its models, and it shouldn't care about that. That's its proprietary solution that's a proprietary IP. The other side of that is, should AI be open source? So when somebody comes up with a fantastic new, foundational model or something, should that be open sourced? And I think that's a different topic. And unfortunately, we won't be discussing that today. That's something we can pick up on in the future. And I think that's actually probably another panel discussion that I'm trying to put together. So maybe we will revisit that. Hey, if you are enjoying the content, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That would really help me out. Thank you. Okay, so let's move on to the third topic, which is data and the cloud, a marriage made in heaven or hell. Paul, over to you. Again, this is one of your topics.
Yeah, I mean, this really started when, probably over a year ago, I was looking at, various topics around data. And the one that sort of came up and bit me was that while cloud is effectively trying to design and develop stateless systems, the inherent contradiction is that data is inherently stateful. It has a state. It's not, and I know developers have got around it, in terms of the way Kubernetes has been used, and there's various, tricks and techniques to make sure that data at least looks stateless, but yeah, that's the challenge. So that's where it started from. You thought, well, okay, that's a bit interesting conundrum for putting data in the cloud, but a number of other things have come into play, and I suppose the two critical ones is, one is latency, and the second one is data sovereignty.
Yeah.
And so the issues really around data sovereignty is sort of fairly straightforward to understand, and it's the fact that various countries do not want you to store your data anywhere outside their boundaries. And the cloud companies have developed regions and data centers in various geographies to get over that particular problem. So to an extent, it's gone away. The other is latency, but also the development of the Internet of Things, IoT, and very much where do you store data? How do you store data? Can data at the edge be in a cloud? All those sort of questions. That says, is it hell or is it heaven? I think it's in theory it ought to be heaven. You can just hand all your data over to a cloud provider, and it'll be more secure. You can access it, that everybody can access it. It's a single portal to get into it, all those sort of things. But the reality is, you've got to have a decent data architecture put together, so where everything needs to be stored and why and for how long. And so much. The thing I've been finding as I've had to delve deeper and deeper into the sort of data world is two things. Firstly, is the quality of the data we've got is lousy. People don't even know where it is, let alone data quality is poor, and that's a real blocker on things like AI. Are going to find that really difficult unless we get to grips with the quality of data, where it's stored, but also then having to work out what data do I actually need to keep. I mean, IoT, IoT could, never mind AI breaking the
internet.
The internet.
Yeah.
Moving data around could break the internet. And the other one literally was when I was looking at financial trading platforms, the way in which data has to be almost embedded in the technology, on site for the latency issues. You're getting, hence my interest in streaming analytics and how do you bring that in at low latency and all those sort of things. So I think, and what I noticed, if you look at both Google and AWS seem to be sort of quite prominent in it, is cool, is starting to promote the idea of a data cloud.
Right.
And, data cloud is really data management platforms, but run on Google Cloud or AWS or Azure, I presume. But there's a sort of inherent, inherent marketing position that says actually those data management platforms need to reside in the cloud for them to be effective. And I think that's wrong. Personally, I do not think that is an absolute given that they have to reside in a public cloud. Back to what we said right at the start of this, the cloud is IT and IT is the cloud. Everybody calls everything cloud. But I do actually put my foot down and say, is a data cloud the way you have to go, to make the data management platforms, to make data fabric or data mesh a reality today? And I don't think it is. And I'll fight for that. So to an extent, if we put everything into the cloud, and by that I mean into the public cloud, it'll be nearer hell than heaven.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of, I think, different ways this can go. So I think we need to be, first of all, clear. For me, we need to be clear about when we use the word data, what do we mean by data? And I don't mean like a definition of data, but what aspect of that whole data sort of piece that we're talking about. So whether it's kind of, where is the data stored, how's it managed, what platform do we use, how much of it do we retain, is it as you said, is it correctly labeled, is it the right type of data, is it cleansed, and so on, and and how do we secure it, how do we encrypt it, how do we put it in or manage it in a DR situation, and so on. So there's a number of different, and is it sovereign, and so on. So there's a number of different kind of parameters, if you like, to that. So, and I do agree with the point that you mentioned about stateless apps. Kubernetes started off and it was kind of, everything's stateless. And it was like, no, it's not everything stateless. You have these little things called databases which you're going to have to cater for. And then they had to almost retrofit that ability into Kubernetes in order for it to be able to deal with stateful applications that we do need to keep our data, because that's what we're doing. We're transacting, or we need to store our previous state or something. So sorry, Kubernetes and the very enthusiastic open source community world and the CNCF or whatever, but business is going to bring you down to reality. Let's get down to business and let's get down to reality, kids. So I think that was quite correct. Sovereignty, I think you and I covered. Latency, I think, as you said, you'd probably need it to be near to where the processing is happening as possible, or near to the point of storing it, near to the point of where it's being captured or streamed, which I think was your point of last time that we talked about in terms of data streaming. I think was quite interesting. I picked up a little bit more. I mean, we talked about cloud data management, remember, in the past. I think we had a conversation around that. I think that's still as relevant as ever, to be honest with you. I think the likes of shifts like datamesh have really helped to kind of bring more focus to that. And obviously datamesh is kind of the latest attempt at making that whole cloud data management thing sort of work. We've had data warehouse and data lakes and data lake house, somewhere in between. I will provide definitions for all of this, guys, so we've got a great link for that, so don't worry about that. But all of that, I think, is kind of not really, well, it's kind of worked for a while, but not really, as the rest of the technology maybe around the data and what's generating the data has changed. We've also had to change the management of data itself as well. Go ahead.
I agree with you. I think, but the real push has to be use the data once. So things like data lake houses, data lakes, whatever, almost is like using it twice or three times.
Well, it is, it is. Which I think is why probably data mesh came in and said, just keep your data domains. Don't worry about it. We'll secure it and govern it centrally, but we'll federate everything else.
Now I'll challenge that, because data mesh is not central management. It's data fabric is central management.
Okay, all right. We may have to differ
So
on
one
that
thing
one.
to
Have to
look
agree to
at
disagree on that one.
data. Yeah, we'll come back to that. I'll send you a Bloor document that
Okay,
looks at the difference between data mesh and
okay,
fabric.
okay.
But data mesh is very definitely distributed, but it's distributed management as well. It's not, so it's keep everything in one place. It's very domain oriented. So
Mm,
they're looking at this in domains, whether that's a vertical, line of business domain or a group domain or whatever. Whereas data fabric tends to be slightly more technology driven, but centralized way of looking at the management. If not, it still says keep the data where it is. Don't move the data into a data, into another data lake or another data warehouse. Use it, you can use it for both transactions and analysis, data
mm,
analysis.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean that'll be an interesting debate: data fabric versus data mesh. We're gonna have that debate. But I'll send you the Bloor document on that one of our data analysts wrote, which I think is quite illuminating, and it's sort of helped me as I
Okay,
talk to companies about data. But yeah,
interesting. Okay, did he talk to Copilot at all about that? Because Copilot, I think, disagrees, but that is something we'll pick up on, and I will include some information on
I will have to go and ask
that.
Copilot because no,
Okay,
I asked a real person.
yeah, okay, right. So, all right, so let's see. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, let's see what happens with that. So, like I said, I think I agreed with all of those sort of points, and I did pick up on a lot of other sort of areas we've seen. For example, around data charges being dropped, the egress charges being dropped by all three public cloud providers. So all top three cloud providers, cloud service providers, so Amazon, Google, and Microsoft have dropped all of their sort of charges. And I guess this is an element that cloud has now sort of brought in, and for us to again be an ongoing concern, right, in terms of kind of egress charges and storing your data in the cloud and things like that. So maybe in the data center, maybe we didn't care about that. We just threw in another hard drive into the SAN or NAS that we have. But in the public clouds, it's different too, and you need to account for those things and have those as part of your cloud cost management or FinOps strategy, I guess.
Yeah, I can take a slightly cynical worldview of that, and them saying, actually, by the time you put your data, all your data into our cloud, the chances of you moving significant amounts of that anywhere else, other than for transactional purposes, like having to move it down to a local transaction process of some kind, is probably pretty rare. I think early on it was a wonderful way of ensuring that people didn't ship it around, but there's so much data now. Our company is going to start thinking, hey, I can move my data wherever I wanted that move it to. No,
Yeah.
so they've probably gone, actually it was giving us more PR problems than it was
Yeah,
worth.
probably. Okay, so I picked up on a few other points there. So the recent term that I've kind of seen being thrown around when I was at Cloud Expo Europe in London, and also the big data event in London as well. I saw the term data observability being thrown around, which I thought was quite interesting. I won't go into the details of it, but again, I saw a number of vendors who were actually talking about data observability. So that's another interesting one. Maybe that's more around the sort of the cloud data management aspect, but again, something we'll maybe explore in the future. Again, looking at all of this stuff, there was a lot of things around data labeling that's more interesting, around AI sort of workloads, I guess.
That's quality of data.
Yeah, exactly. Data architectures. Again, there's a battle around, as we said, data lakes and data warehouse, data lakehouse, data mesh, and data fabric, as you mentioned as well. So I think this is all interesting. We need to go back to the 4 stages of data migration chart that I shared with you a while back. I think that's something that we need to pick on. So maybe that can be our next sort of data discussion point, I guess, because that does kind of hit on the more practical, how do you migrate your data into the cloud? How do you migrate databases? How do you do data, which I think splits into two things. A database migration, which is kind of like for like, if you like, and maybe a database transformation, which takes you from an old type of database to a more modern type of database. So maybe from a, you know, a RDBMS type of database into an unstructured type of database. So I think all of that, again, is part of that process.
That would be an interesting discussion, because obviously one of the things that we've seen is this proliferation of different types of databases now to deal with we've talked about them in the past, vector databases,
vector databases, exactly.
Or, you know, and literally, I think, you know, hence the idea of a data architecture becomes really important, because you've got to start thinking about what the business is trying to do and how it's going to need to use its data and in what format it needs to be. So
yeah, indeed. Okay. Anything else from you on that topic? Was there?
No, I just wanted to put it out there. As I think, you know, it's sort of flown under the radar a little bit. You know, the applications, and it was like the data is going to follow the applications. Well, we got news for you, boys. It's the data that's going to be driving this in the future.
Yeah, and it's not exactly a small thing that, you know, you can miss off your radar. So.
Well, surprising. It's surprising. You know, we've moved from what I would have called the application age to the data age.
Yeah, I would say that it hasn't been a big consideration and factor, but I think it now definitely needs to be. If it wasn't before, it now definitely needs to be.
People had a wrong idea about data. You know, they wanted information. Yes, that's fine, but what they didn't realize was the important role that data played in delivering decent information. Oh, I've got all the data I need. I just need better information. No, you don't. You need better data, you know. But
Indeed.
We can argue that one later.
Indeed. Okay, so I think we've come to the end of this particular episode. Paul, thank you ever so much, as always. Good to have you back. Appreciate your insights, you know, on everything that we've talked about. All the links for all the stuff that we've talked about, and then some, will be in the description of the video. Love to hear from you guys in terms of what you think about all these topics. Any of these impacting you? What's your views on the topics? Do you agree or disagree? I don't think Paul and I really mind whether you do or not, and maybe we don't care. No, actually, we do care, but certainly, you know, would love to hear from you. Thanks all for watching, and we will see you next time. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel to support me. You may also want to check out some of the other videos on this channel. Bye for now.